Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow good stories.
The bright sunlight shone through the oak trees, and a blue butterfly fluttered past the room where Maxie lay sound asleep. Outside, the servants were bustling about with their chores. Stirred by the noise, Maxie woke abruptly. She glanced around as the servants quickly bowed and prepared to leave. Where is our Riften? She asked hesitantly. One of the maids replied, The Lord is at the training grounds, my lady. He will be departing around noon. Relieved, Maxie thought, this time, I can say goodbye properly. Meanwhile, the knights were busy preparing supplies for the journey. Maxie tied her hair into a ponytail and wore a green dress. She hurried down the stairs, hoping to catch Riften before he left. At the training grounds, Riften was scolding the soldiers. I won't accept this. Everyone who fought in the battle deserves to attend the victory banquet. Every last one of you. Rot. One of the knights spoke up. Sir Calypso is right. Dragon knights should be present. Lord Over and Sir Cedric are already here to protect Anatole. I was actually thinking of staying behind myself. Hearing this, Riften felt a bit more at ease. But as he glanced around, he caught sight of a figure peeking out from behind a pillar. After a brief moment, he realized who it was. His mood immediately brightened. That's enough for today, he announced. Yes, Commander, the knights responded in unison. Maxie, who had been anxiously debating whether to approach Riften, froze in place. What was I thinking running here so recklessly? What if I'm bothering him? But before she could make up her mind, a shadow loomed over her. Riften had already found her. Our Rodrigo sent me, she stammered. The midday meal is ready, so I came to inform you. Riften immediately turned to the knights. It's time for lunch, he called out. Then, lowering his voice, he looked at Maxie and asked, And how are you feeling, by the way? Confused, Maxie hesitated. Last night, you said I hurt you. Are you really okay? Riften smirked. I'm fine, but I wish you'd said something like that when we were in bed. Maxie flushed a deep red. Don't say things like that. What if someone hears us? Riften laughed softly and pulled her closer. My innocent wife, he murmured, but then his expression turned somber. Wrapping his arms tightly around her, he sighed. Damn it, I really don't want to leave. Maxie's eyes widened. She knew how much Riften wanted to stay, but she couldn't let her selfishness get in the way of his duties. Gently patting his shoulder, she encouraged him. Please, do your best. Though it was the last thing she wanted, she knew Riften had to go. The walk to the dining hall felt far too short, and Maxie couldn't bring herself to say more. Soon, the time for departure arrived. Riften mounted his horse and looked down at her. I'll be back, he said. Startled, Maxie called out. Wait, please, travel safely and take care of yourself. Riften's gaze softened. Those are the only words I needed to hear. He leaned down to press a kiss to her forehead. A gentle breeze swept past them, carrying the murmurs of soldiers who coughed awkwardly, clearly flustered by the intimate moment. Maxie's face turned as red as a ripe strawberry. Riften smiled tenderly. I'll return soon, I promise. I'll be waiting, Maxie replied. With a final call, Riften commanded, Let's go. The convoy set off, winding through the mountain paths. Maxie stood at the gates, watching until the fortress was out of sight. Rodrigo, the butler, approached her. The Lord has truly changed, my lady. This is the first time he's ever promised to return quickly, and it's all thanks to you. Maxie looked at him in surprise. Before Lord Calypso came, Anatole was just a barren land, Rodrigo continued. He built the fortress with his own resources and defended the people from monsters. But he never once left and promised to return. We often feared he might never come back. It wasn't until you arrived that he started seeing this place as home. Home? Maxie repeated softly. Rodrigo nodded with a warm smile. We're so glad to have you here, my lady. Maxie felt a pang of doubt. Do I even deserve such kind words? I haven't done anything for Riften or the people. Everyone knows I'm useless. Dark thoughts began to weigh on her again. Riften and everyone else will soon treat me like my father did. If I get abandoned again. Her anxiety grew as days passed, and soon the stress left her bedridden. I'll take care of the lady, One servant said, "You can all take the day off. Don't forget to pick up her medicine from the mage tomorrow morning." Maxie stirred awake, her vision blurry, as a warm voice called out to her, "My lady, you must be exhausted." The voice was even warmer than the fever coursing through her. Tears welled in her eyes. "If this continues, I'm afraid I'll grow greedy and want more of it." Meanwhile, Riften's party pressed on through the night. A sudden horde of monsters ambushed them, but the knights dispatched the creatures with swift precision. "The closer we get to the capital, the worse it gets," Heberin grumbled. "And this is supposed to be a shortcut? It's a nightmare," another knight muttered. Despite the chaos, Riften pushed ahead, his thoughts lingering on Maxie. "I'll come back to her. I have to." As he tightened his grip on the reins, he shouted, "Anyone who falls behind, you're on your own." "Yes, Commander," came the resounding reply. Maxie watched the young boy smile brightly as he carried a bucket of water to help the others. She suddenly felt a pang of sadness, wondering when she would ever be able to smile so freely. Her eyes grew distant as she tried to grasp some form of hope, but a familiar, scornful voice echoed in her mind. "If you weren't born a boy, at least you could have been normal. Why don't you just fall ill and die like your mother did?" Her knees buckled, and she began trembling with fear. But then, memories of tender moments with Riften came rushing back to her, pushing away the darkness. Maxie clenched her fists and steeled her resolve. "I don't want to disappoint you, Riften. If I can manage everything smoothly as the lady of this castle, then even if you hate me, you'll allow me to stay here." Determined, she turned to one of the maids. Please call the merchants to come." Despite her resolve, Maxie soon found herself flustered as Ruth scolded her over a miscalculation. The mage scratched his head and grumbled, "One marble tile costs 20 dirhams, my lady, not 2 dirhams." Maxie, thoroughly confused, stammered, The difference is that big." Ruth threw up his hands. "A single lorem is worth 12 dirhams. If you keep calculating like this, Lord Calypso will go bankrupt. He'll have to dive into a dragon's lair to hunt another one sooner than planned." Maxie trembled. I'm not used to managing the accounts." "Why yet? Then you should have said so earlier," Ruth huffed. "The steward will understand." Maxie gasped in panic as Ruth set the papers down. Wait. Don't tell him. Why, you promised to help me." A few days earlier, Maxie had descended the stairs, feeling overwhelmed by the renovations she had to manage. Down below, she overheard hushed whispers. "Do you think the mage will be angry?" Even in the dining hall, he's been muttering to himself lately. The maids froze and bowed awkwardly as they noticed her approach. Maxie nodded in acknowledgement and walked past without a word. That evening, exhaustion weighed heavily on her. She groaned at the endless calculations for supplies. Despite her best efforts, she wasn't confident she had done anything correctly. Sighing, Maxie slumped forward and buried her face in the desk. Suddenly, a loud thud startled her. A hand had slammed against the pile of books on her desk. Maxie's eyes widened as she shot upright. What was that? "Who's there?" To her surprise, a head peeked out from behind the books. It was Ruth, looking groggy. "Why have you been so noisy lately, my lady?" he asked, yawning. "Noisy?" Maxie stammered. "Me? Yes," Ruth replied irritably. "You've been groaning and sighing in the library non-stop. Don't you know you've been disturbing my naps?" Maxie blushed in embarrassment, her eyes widening. Wait. You've been watching me for days? I didn't even notice." "Of course you didn't," Ruth said, feigning indifference. "This is a library, my lady. It's rude to make so much noise." Maxie pointed at him indignantly. But you're the one using the library as your personal bedroom." Ruth's expression shifted slightly. "You might not know this, but even at midnight, people come begging the mage for healing. Please, help us. Use your magic, they say. I tell them magic can't cure exhaustion, but they insist. Then they ask for herbs instead." He sighed heavily. "I understand their desperation after all. I'm the only mage in this castle. But being pestered day and night like this." Hearing his words, Maxie felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Ruth waved dismissively. "It's fine. It's my duty after all. Besides," he added with a faint smile, "I'm glad you've recovered, my lady." Suddenly, Riften noticed a roll of paper on the table. Is this the ledger? Without waiting for permission, Ruth grabbed it and began reading, despite Maxie's protests. And no, don't look at that, Maxie cried, trying to snatch it back. But Ruth's sharp eyes quickly caught the irregularities. His hands trembled as he exclaimed, "What? How is this possible? Please, just give it back," Maxie begged. Ruth shot her a side eye. "How much money have you spent?" Maxie avoided his gaze and stammered, "Well, our Riften said I didn't need to worry about the expenses." Ruth exploded. "How could you not worry? If you need help, ask for it." And so, Ruth's impromptu lessons on accounting began. He sat at the desk, tapping his fingers irritably. "When I said you should find someone to help you, I meant Rodrigo." Maxie frowned. "But, why you agreed to help me?" she muttered, thinking to herself that if she went to Rodrigo, he would surely think she was incompetent. Ruth sighed dramatically. "You're as shameless as your husband." Blushing, Maxie shot back, "How dare you say that? Our Riften and I are completely different. He's trustworthy, honest, and a very kind person." Ruth rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Focus, my lady." "All right." Maxie nodded, trying to concentrate. The rest of the day was filled with Ruth teaching her how to calculate and manage the accounts. His methods were a bit harsh, and after hours of relentless corrections, Ruth slumped in his chair, looking utterly drained. Meanwhile, Maxie whimpered a small thank you, but Ruth muttered, "My soul has already left my body." By late afternoon, both of them stumbled out of the library, exhausted. Ruth grumbled the entire way down the hallway, but then suddenly stopped under a large tree. "What is it?" Maxie asked, puzzled. Looking up at the branches, Ruth said, "I noticed you're planning to renovate the garden." Maxie nodded. "Why yes, but I'm not sure if our Riften would like it." Ruth gestured toward the tree. "If you plan to cut this one down, be warned the servants might be upset." Maxie tilted her head in confusion. But I heard this tree is dead. It doesn't even have leaves." Wouldn't it be better to chop it for firewood?" Ruth shook his head and explained, "The people of Anatole believe a goddess resides in the trees, so they're very cautious about cutting them down even if they're dead. And this is an oak tree, no less." What's special about oak trees?" Maxie asked curiously. "You must have heard the legend of Sir Wigrin, haven't you?" Ruth began. "Every child knows the tale of the man who ended the Dark War in ancient times with a sword blessed by the gods. He founded the mighty Roem Empire. According to legend, Sir Wigrin rode a white dragon and ascended to the heavens after fulfilling his duty here in Anatole. But this place has a unique twist to the story. The people here believe he and his dragon flew up from the hill just outside Anatole Castle." Ruth continued, "And there's also the famous tale of Sir Wigrin's romance with the oak tree goddess. They say the goddess still waits for his return. During the spring festival, all the maidens gather in the fields to sing songs of blessing for their love." Maxie's eyes widened. "So, if I chop down the oak tree for firewood?" Ruth sighed. "Then everyone in Anatole will hate you. Of course, they won't say it outright because you're the lady of this land, but they revere Wigrin deeply." Maxie bit her lip, unsure of what to do. But I can't just leave a dead tree standing here. It looks so creepy." Ruth noticed Maxie's various expressions and sighed in exasperation. "Fine, I'll see if I can revive this tree." In the kitchen, the servants chatted as they worked, gossiping about how Lady Maximilian had requested the mage to resurrect the oak tree in the castle. When mentioning the lady, they couldn't help but express their gratitude. "I was so terrified when the Lord first arrived I couldn't even breathe." "Same here. I nearly fainted," another chimed in. The maids shifted to discussing the Lord himself. "Sure, he's handsome, but his personality. But with the lady, he's completely different," one added. "I've never seen him so gentle." "All those rumors about his romance with Princess Agnes? Absolute nonsense. If they were true, why would he bring the lady here? Not to mention he keeps reminding us to treat her with respect, even threatening to kick us out if we're rude to her." As the chatter grew more animated, a man's voice cut through the room. "Enough with your babbling. I don't know about other things, but I can tell you the food here is 1,000 times better than in the Croy Castle." One maid raised an eyebrow. "I don't believe that. Anatol is on the edge of the continent. How could the food here be better? The old man puffed up his chest proudly. Clearly, you've never seen the lady's expression when she dines. I'm certain she enjoys it immensely. Another maid added, Rudy's mentioned that she loves tea as well. The old man thumped his chest. You see, the lady has fallen for Anatol, all thanks to this kitchen. The conversation continued with everyone praising Maxie, convinced she was a kind and noble lady. Meanwhile, in the library, Ruth was engrossed in his reading while Maxie fidgeted nervously. Suddenly, he threw a piece of paper onto the desk with a loud thud and scratched his head. I think this will do. No mistakes. Maxie let out a sigh of relief, but her eyes widened as she noticed the coins in front of her. She was surprised to see how different dirhams and lorams were in size. Looking at Ruth with a hopeful gaze, she asked, why do we use Zoam Empire currency in the southern continent? The Gem Empire collapsed long ago. Ruth turned away and sighed. I didn't expect you to ask that, he muttered before beginning his explanation. What do you know about the western continent? He asked. Maxie replied hesitantly, I know it has 7 kingdoms including Weden. Before that, Ruth continued, the western continent was under the rule of the Doam Empire. Before the empire, the entire continent was divided into 10 kingdoms. Lord Darien, along with 10 heroes from those kingdoms, united the land to form the Doam Empire. After its collapse, the continent was divided into 7 kingdoms, and Weden was one of them. Kings and lords fought countless battles to defend and expand their territories. Eventually, they signed a truce to focus on fighting the increasing number of monsters. That was about 30 years ago. Although the Doam family lost all power and is closely monitored, their currency is still used because the empire was once a great power. Ruth hesitated before adding, the one who benefited the most from this was Duke Croy. He used to be one of Weden's lords, but he managed to seize fertile lands belonging to Doam. However, when the 7 kingdoms signed the truce, Dristan began pressuring him to return the territories he had taken. As a result, he lost nearly half his lands. Ruth continued, to secure what remained, the Duke married into the Doam family Arian Doam, your mother. She was first in line to inherit the Doam family's legacy. This marriage allowed him to avoid territorial disputes. It's a story everyone on the continent knows. Maxie gripped her dress tightly after hearing Ruth's explanation. Even though he didn't say it outright, she understood the connection between this story and her father's strictness toward her. Her father feared she might somehow interfere with Rosetta's arranged marriage to royalty. I'm sorry, Maxie stammered. I didn't mean to make things you uncomfortable. Ruth shook his head. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to emphasize the lingering influence of the Doam name. No, it's fine, Maxie said, waving her hands. I was just a little distracted. Moving on, she asked, what about Southern currency? Their trade is very active, Ruth explained. We use their currency because it's practical. If a coin's value is too high, transactions become inconvenient. You can't exactly split a coin into pieces to buy a single apple, can you? He went on to describe the currencies of other nations, mentioning that he hoped Anatol's trade with the South would flourish by the next spring. Oh, and don't forget dirhams and Doam coins are the most valuable in the world. Doam coins are massive, the size of a book, and made of pure orichalcum. There are only about 600 of them across the continent, and Riften owns 160 of them. Maxie gasped. He owns that many? Ruth nodded. 6 years ago, he found them in a monster's lair in Osa. Back then, he hunted monsters like a madman, collecting treasures from all over. Among everything in that hoard, the Doam coins were the most valuable. He originally had 200, but he spent 40 on fortifications, roads, and repairs. He did all that with just 40 coins? Maxie asked, astonished. Ruth scowled and slammed the desk. 20 coins would have been plenty, but he insisted on rushing construction, doubling the costs. Such a waste. Maxie felt uneasy as Ruth continued muttering about costs. You have no idea how much money we've poured into Anatol, and we'll need even more in the future. I won't allow any extravagance. Ruth had ruthlessly slashed most of Maxie's plans for decorating the castle, leaving her feeling guilty. She eventually approached Rodrigo to adjust orders, much to the merchant's confusion. As the renovations progressed, the castle began to transform, exciting everyone who eagerly awaited its completion. However, Maxie's thoughts remained preoccupied with her duties, especially as winter approached. I have to manage everything properly while Riften is away, she resolved. When Riften left the territory, the castle's renovations began in earnest. Everyone was excited and eagerly awaited the day the castle would be completely transformed. Rodrigo frequently updated Maxie on the progress in each area and asked about her next instructions. Maxie diligently supervised the work, focusing on every detail, but deep down, she still felt uncertain. She realized, with all the work on the castle, she had forgotten to prepare for the winter. With Riften away, I have to manage everything properly, she thought. At the very least, the account books were being meticulously kept. While reviewing the tasks that needed her attention, she overheard a conversation between two maids. I'm sure the Lord will be surprised when he returns, one said. The castle looks much better now. Once the new chandeliers are up, it'll look even more stunning, the other replied. The Lord is bound to be pleased. Hearing this, Maxie's cheeks flushed. Will he really be happy? She wondered, but then doubt crept in. What if he thinks I've overstepped my bounds? Shaking her head, she pushed the thought away. No, even Ruth said everything was fine. I can't waste time worrying. She decided to check the stables next. There, she found an old man feeding the horses. When he saw her, he gasped for breath, having rushed over. My lady, what brings you here? Maxie replied, I came to see if you need anything to prepare for winter. The old man wiped his brow. I think we'll need new partitions for the stables. These mischievous foals are acting like devils, and our woodworking tools are old and worn. We also don't have enough timber. I see, Maxie said. Anything else you need? We'll also need more hay to store for the winter, he added. Maxie smiled. I'll add it to the order list. The old man bowed respectfully as Maxie walked away. Once outside, she sighed. Managing a castle is harder than I thought. Closing her notebook, she wondered, am I doing this right? At least she had become more comfortable interacting with strangers. Her stutter persisted, but it had improved. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept past, making her red hair float in the breeze. A sweet memory of Riften's voice filled her mind. Your hair flows like fiery clouds. Maxie looked up at the clear, blue sky, silently praying. Riften, I hope you arrive safely. She imagined Riften at the victory celebration, surrounded by admiring noblewomen. Surely, one of them would try to charm him. Would he regret his decision? She wondered, does he think being with me was a mistake? A voice snapped her out of her thoughts. My lady, what are you doing here alone? Startled, Maxie turned to see two soldiers approaching. Recognizing them as guards she'd met at a previous banquet, she waved her hand dismissively. And no, it's fine. The soldiers exchanged worried looks, likely thinking they'd startled her. Sensing her discomfort, one of them pounded his chest and introduced himself. Apologies, my lady. My name is Yulia Zarova. Next year, I'll be old enough to become a knight. And I'm Garo Lakin, my lady, the other added. Maxie smiled nervously. I am Maximilian Calypse. Ulysse tilted his head. Were you out for a walk, my lady? Maxie quickly replied, and no. I'm just inspecting the castle. Ulysse looked concerned. It's dangerous for you to be wandering around like this, my lady. What if something happens? He said, offering to escort her despite not yet being a knight. Maxie hesitated, wanting to decline, but the earnest and slightly crestfallen expression on Ulysses' face made her relent. All right, if you insist. The two young men led her along courteously, and Maxie couldn't help but feel uneasy. Is this really appropriate? She wondered. Unlike the other knights, these two didn't seem intimidating at all. Perhaps it's because they're so young. My lady, Ulysses' voice pulled her out of her thoughts, making her jump. What is it? She stammered. Why are you heading to the forge? He asked curiously. I wanted to check if anyone needs anything, Maxie explained. I heard merchants won't be visiting the castle much during winter. Oh, Ulysses exclaimed. We were just about to head to the forge too. I broke my sword during training last time. Not that I'll ever be as skilled as Lord Riften. Garo sighed and muttered, next year, we'll both be knights of the Rivedon Dragon Corps. Shouldn't your goal be a little more realistic? Ulysses ignored him, his tone growing animated. You don't understand. Lord Riften is on another level. Even being 1/10 as skilled as him would be a monumental achievement. Hearing this, Maxie blinked in surprise. Is Riften really that incredible? Ulysses practically glowed with admiration. A single word like incredible doesn't do him justice, my lady. He's considered the reincarnation of Sir Ross Wu himself. 6 years ago, he defeated Sir Siru Aran of Livedon in a sparring match and then went on to best Sir Qual Leon of Osa while hunting dragons. Both of them are among the 5 knights hailed as living embodiments of Sir Ross Wu. Puffing out his chest, Ulysses added proudly, I decided to become a knight after witnessing his swordsmanship. Even before the dragon-slaying expedition, Lord Riften was already at the top of his game. Have you seen him wield a sword, my lady? Maxie clenched her fists and blurted, oh, of course I have. Her mind, however, betrayed her with memories of her first journey to Anatole, how she'd vomited and fainted the moment things turned chaotic. Does that even count? She wondered, frowning slightly. Still, she didn't want to admit she hadn't truly seen him in action. I'm his wife, after all. Embellishing her tone, she began, I've seen Riften swing his sword and slice a giant in half. In a single instant, the 2 young men's faces lit up with excitement, prompting Maxie to gesture more dramatically as she continued her story. And it wasn't just one giant, she exclaimed. There were a dozen of them. He cut them all down in mere moments. Ulysses' eyes sparkled with awe. Really? A whole dozen giants? My lady, you must tell us more. Maxie froze, her face darkening as she stammered, well, I guess. Feeling cornered, she carried on with her embellishment. So Maxie is gradually proving her abilities day by day, but will Riften acknowledge her amidst the challenges ahead? Don't forget to like and subscribe to Revenping's channel to follow the manhwa under the oak tree.